All right, so here we are to part 3 now of the
Yeah,
podcast. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for rejoining us.
I wanted to ask you about was going back to the margin of error that we spoke about. Uh, can we really afford that margin of error at this moment? And what do you think will happen if we achieve those SDGs in 2050 instead of 2030? Like, what would
Well,
happen if we, just push the deadline ahead?
so here, it's important. We're broadening our focus a lot where we talk about the SDGs versus just where we're talking about climate change, which is just SDG 13. So, one out of the 17 goals. So where we say if we push back the SDGs, I'm going to assume in that scenario that we've pushed back climate action, which is bad, and we've already talked about that. But of course, we have really good goals, aspirations for humanity in terms of poverty reduction, education, equity, et cetera, et cetera. All the 17 goals are important, not only climate change. And we didn't actually meet the Millennium Development Goals that came before the
Yeah.
SDGs. Not all of those were fulfilled, and they ran out. And then it's like, oh, well, that's okay. Well, we won't extend these goals to call attention to the fact that we didn't meet all of them, but we'll make new goals. And oh, sustainable. That's a buzzword now. Let's call them the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're good goals, but are we going to meet them by 2030? Well, history says we probably won't. Please prove me wrong. Anyone, take that as a challenge. Please, someone in a position to achieve all the SDGs by 2030, take my challenge. Please prove me wrong by making sure that we meet them by 2030. If we push them back to 2050, as you've questioned, leaving aside again that that's pretty disastrous for climate change. But even for the other ones, that's we're perpetuating generations more of human suffering, right? Because in that extra 20 years, I mean, that's enough time for a whole nother generation to possibly become old enough that they're having then their own kids making the next generation. So a lot of these negative feedback loops, these vicious cycles, sort of where, if someone is born into poverty, they're more likely to, be stuck in poverty, and then their kids are born in poverty who are then stuck in poverty. So, the human cost of postponing the SDGs, it just gets worse the longer it takes us to come to terms with those. But of course, a lot of the same geopolitics are in play when it comes to the SDGs as well. And it's part of this global inequality that we have that some people they already have all, like, the SDGs aren't even relevant to them in their country because they already have all that stuff. Um, and then it's just a question of why isn't more support being given to the countries where we haven't met those goals, so that they become able to meet them. And then the specter of climate change comes back in and threatens to undermine and complicate all the other goals. That's why I will say SDG 13 is still the most important one, because if you don't meet that one, all the other goals aren't going to be met either, because climate change will say hi. And yeah, your other goals wouldn't be fulfilled either. But
So there might just come a possibility we might come up with new goals in 2030 again. Like history repeating itself, what happened with MDGs now happening with SDGs, and there's a whole set of new goals that we have to fulfill by within another 15 years.
well, yeah, that will be very interesting, right? To see how that's going to play out in 2030. How far did we fall short? How willing will people be to acknowledge where we fell short? How much discussion will there be around why we fell short? Will there be some interesting, finger pointing going on? Um, we should have our popcorn ready in 2030 to see how this is all going to play out. And then, yeah, will they extend the goals? will we have to call them something else because that's the politically correct way to say, oh, we didn't fail, we didn't need to extend, but it was time to update our goals and set new goals, what would they be called then? That might be an interesting contest. Ask people, what would you call the next round of goals? Um, maybe instead of the sustainable development goals, they're the I don't know, the enhanced development goals, or there's all kinds of nice words that we use in the UNFCCC. We're always enhancing things, or so it's the enhanced goals, or you can stick a plus. That's also what you can do. You can stick anytime you stick a plus on something, that also works. So you started with red, but then you can have red plus. So it'll be SDGs plus. Who knows? I'm sure a lot of diplomats will work very hard to come up with the name to call it that will minimize their disappointment in having not fulfilled them as much as possible. But I will say, I mean, we're being very critical here of the goals, but it still is probably better to aim big and fall short than to just aim short in the first place. So that we did at least get countries to agree on setting the goals, that was good. Will we have still made some progress on them? Yes. I don't know that we will have actually gone backwards by 2030 from where we were, in 2015 when we adopted the goals.
Right.
So, and this is where I myself have complicated feelings about that question of has the climate negotiations made progress? We're about to be on COP29 now for this year. That's 29 years of negotiations. And, a lot of people very reasonably question, why is it so slow? Is it even worth having it? And it's like, well, but it has made progress. It's not as though it didn't go anywhere. And we're still better off having it than not having it, I would say. Is the Paris Agreement perfect? No. Are we probably going to blow past its 2-degree goal? Yeah, probably. But will we still end up with less warming thanks to having had a Paris Agreement than we would have otherwise? I would say the answer is yes. So we will still be better off. And at least it's a framework that can be improved. So, at least we can still build upon the SDGs for the post 2030 timeframe. And, at least each increment is still useful. So I don't want to be only critical of these structures and not give them any credit, because if we really had to give them no credit, then there'd be no hope. Where do you still
Right.
feel
Exactly.
hope if every structure that we have is just horrible and doesn't do anything? It's like, no, it does do things. It's not fast enough, but it does do something. And as long as we're still aspiring to do something and countries are agreeing to do something, then it does keep the door open for hope that we can do it faster and fast enough, and that it still helps, and we're still ultimately better off. Because if countries didn't even have any structure, suppose countries gave up after the big disaster in Copenhagen, where everyone expected we were going to get something like the Paris Agreement, and then they left with, we take note of the Copenhagen Accord, and not even everybody thought the accord was good. uh then countries wouldn't even be talking to each other. There'd be no incentive for any country to reduce their emissions. There'd be no way to put pressure on countries, right? China would be saying, oh, well, we'll just emit as much as we want. And the US would be saying, oh, well, we'll just emit as much as we want. Um, but at least US had to set a target in their NDC. And then you can say, United States, your target isn't good enough. Oh, you're moving too slowly to achieve your target. But you can only criticize them about that because we had a process that forced them to even agree to making a target. So these structures do help. I don't know how else humanity would try to tackle this than through this kind of a process. And as frustrating as it is, and it makes you want to pull your hair out sometimes sitting in these meetings and watching this happening. And you're like, But outside, like there's cyclones and like we see all this bad stuff, and you're here talking about, you know, do we put a comma here, or what does this term or word mean, or is this the right room in which we should be talking about this topic versus a different room? You know, yeah, it has a lot of messy things and a lot of just absurd things that make you laugh or cry or shake your head, but it is still the best we've got, and we're better with it than without it. And same for the SDGs.
So, coming back to the negotiations, I've already asked this question in one of the meetings. What happens when there is no verdict on the negotiations?
By no verdict, do you mean like parties don't reach a decision?
Yes,
Or,
like there is no common ground on what the parties decide.
yeah, when they end up in that situation, then it means they don't adopt anything. It is a consensus process. So that means consensus means the absence of any formal objections. Doesn't mean everyone's happy, but it means they're not saying no. And it basically then just means they have to pick up this topic again. So to give people an example, which is probably also what you're thinking of since we've talking about ACE, from the last COP in Dubai, for ACE specifically, parties were trying to get to a decision there and ultimately weren't able to do so because G77 was saying we need to start a conversation about how to solve the lack of finance for ACE. May we please open that up as a topic that we can talk about more together? Please, developed countries, can we talk about this? And developed countries were, yeah, no, we can't talk about that. Um, and then, developing countries like, but could we please just talk about it just a little bit, just informally, not even in negotiations, but in a dialogue. It doesn't pose any threat to you that we're going to ask you for money. Can we just please talk about? No, we can't. So that's why, for the first time in the history of the ACE discussion, they actually had no decision that happened because, G77 in China said, well, okay, if you're not even going to be willing to agree to start a conversation about this finance issue for ACE that's really important to us, and also to young people, right? Young people we care about ACE and we're pushing for this through Youngo and, the process, then we can't have an agreement here. And so, yeah, they were totally stuck. And this means that now, when we get our next round of negotiations in the process, they'll have to start over again. And so it's going to be very interesting. Again, bring your popcorn. And of course, I'll be bringing more than just my popcorn. I'll be doing the most that I can to try to help them to overcome that process. But so I'm joking when I say popcorn, but there will, of course, still be some fireworks and some drama that will happen. I'm sure someone could make a very entertaining sitcom or reality show or something, making fun of this process because truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. And just some of the things that you'll see happen or the stuff that people will say, and they're speaking not as a person, but as their government in these meetings, right? And some of the things that they say, you just, did they really say that? Do they really believe that? Like, what? Um, like I still remember the time that, and I can say this because this is on the public record. They said this on the public record of the sessions where Canada said, "Oh, well, it's fine if delegates from small islands and some developing countries can't attend the workshop that we do to train and build people's capacity to do ACE better here in Bonn at the climate conference because they can read about those sessions in the annual summary report that we told the secretariat to make." Really? Really? Do you hear yourself? It's okay that they can't attend and get their capacity built because they can read about it in a report at the end of the year. That's not the same thing.
That a
And yet,
summary.
yes, yes, I was seated only several delegates away for her, and this was, I was in this particular setting. I was the ace negotiator for Fiji, one of those small islands, and I'm there trying to argue the case for Fiji that, you know, their Fiji is being with the other small islands left behind from this process because they wouldn't even get their delegates to be able to be in bond to participate. And the developed countries were saying, "Oh no, they can read about it in the report. That's fine." Really, really. Um, I mean, and that's not the only example. And Canadians are still nice people, but that government position was just, yeah, not not
Something
not
else.
help moving the process forward. So yeah, we'll just, we all keep pushing on it, and we'll see what happens in the next round of negotiations. But that same thing happens. It's not only ACE, right? I mean, it took a long time getting loss and damage to be where it is. Um, Climate finance as a whole still isn't where it is. I mean, but it moves a little bit at a time.
Okay, so coming to the little bit of positive side on what we as individuals can do, um, what do you think needs to be done on an individual level to bring about these changes? Like, what can we do that can be beneficial for the environment? Apart from recycling, of course, recycling is one of the most common example. Um, what do you think we can, you know, do about the environment?
Well, yeah, I see two roles for the individual in this. So there's all the different recommendations. There's recycling, turning your lights off, having, energy efficient appliances, et cetera. There's all those things that are very commonly talked about that we know that we can do and should be doing. So be an example of those good behaviors and lifestyle, decisions to the extent that you can. And of course, again, different people will be in very different places, so a lot of the lifestyle change advice is more appropriately directed at people, here in the United States than people who, are in a much more difficult situation. But within whatever the best that you can do with what you have, you can try to contribute toward those kinds of actions. But something we can all do, uh, I think everyone would be able to do this, is contribute to what we're trying to do with ACE on your individual scale. So just simply raise awareness about these issues with the people you personally know, because there's studies that have shown us that a lot of people, they're not going to change their mind just from news that they get from the media or from politicians or from these big sources, but from so-called trusted sources. People are more receptive to information if they trust the place that they're getting it from. And both rightly and wrongly, there's a lot of skepticism that people have toward the media. I myself, I don't bother with most of the traditional media because on neither side are they actually giving you the truth. They're giving you their own very biased version of the truth. Um, or I'd like to get news from news sources in other countries. Like I have actually a couple times, I don't remember the name of the channel, but I was watching international news from in English from some Indian news network, and it was just very interesting to see the way that they were talking about some of the same issues, when I know that in the US or in Europe they would be talking about that same news very differently. um, but to give a personal example of this point of awareness raising, so when I was doing my studies at the University of East Anglia, I got on the bus to go into town and get some groceries, and I happened to end up sitting next to another student. And of course, we just happened to strike up a conversation. Oh, hey, what are you studying? And of course, I say, well, I'm studying climate change and international development. And you never know how someone's going to react to that, right? Because they might be like, oh, well, that's a hoax, and But he was not aggressive. He was just like, oh well, I'm here in the business school, and what's this climate thing even about? Like that doesn't seem like it makes sense. And by the end of a 20-minute bus ride into city center, I had opened up his mind. I hadn't converted him to, oh yes, he was going to be a climate activist now and vote for climate friendly politicians and all of that. But he at least acknowledged that, okay, like there's something to this climate stuff. And maybe I need to look into it a little bit more and see how, it could be relevant. And that could have been anybody, not just someone from the business school. It's extra funny though that it was a student from the business school who is basically just he's there studying how to make money, and unfortunately also has a gap, and he has not gotten any climate awareness raising. Um, but even though it wasn't someone I knew, just the fact that he actually talked to a real person and could relate to me as a fellow student and a fellow person, that was enough trust that I was able to get through to him a little bit. And then if you think about the people you actually know and have some kind of a friendship or relationship with in your life, then hopefully they have an even bigger extent of trust in you. And so if you come to them and start saying, well, hey, this is what I do, this is what CSR is, or this is what environment is, this is why I'm worried, and this is why I'm worried. I'd like you to understand why I'm worried. Um, or I'm trying, I see this problem and I'm trying to fix something, and I'd like more people to be part of trying to fix it. And then you can tell them the simple individual things that they can do, and it's all a step by step process. You can't just start you know giving people the big picture and the big lecture necessarily. um so and I think for both of us, we've had the experience, and a lot of us from our generation, we educated our parents. They weren't the ones who suddenly said, environment and sustainability matters. But we convinced them of that because as their children, we were a uniquely trusted source of that information. And I didn't have as far to go with my mother. I mentioned she was the one from Boston, Massachusetts. So, she already came from a very liberal background. But of course, my father growing up in, 1950s and 60s conservative, rural America, I had more work that I needed to do there. Um, in terms of it's not just about capitalism and profit, but that there's more there. And I've also been lucky, both of my parents were very smart and aware about the world, and so I didn't actually have to work too hard to get them to become aware of the same things that I had. I have also heard, unfortunately, from others that their parents have been even more stubborn and resistant, and to the fact of maybe disowning their children practically, if they're you know going to pursue this climate hoax stuff. That's the most extreme case. I don't get that one too much, but there are still cases where they haven't actually managed to convince some of their own family members of these issues. So I don't want anyone to put themselves in a position trying to do my advice here of, talk to the people about this, if you think that that's going to cause serious negative repercussions for you. It might not make sense to try it with everyone, but just in general, try to help more people become aware. You can do that on the individual scale. You don't have to start a podcast in order to make a difference. It's great if you do. Um, the more people doing that, the better. But you don't have to do that. Everyone knows somebody, and you can try to engage those people.
Perfect. One last thing before we end. Do you have anything to say to our audiences?
Well, I do have one, closing reflection and topic that I wanted to bring up, because a lot of what we've been discussing here is kind of gloomy. It's kind of
Yeah.
scary. It kind of makes you want to go hide away somewhere and pretend that climate change isn't happening and the world is not so complicated and it's not going to be so hard to try to fix it. So I wanted to end on this note of, giving a recognition to what we now actually have a term for, which is good, climate anxiety, which is a term referring to this kind of all the complicated emotions that you can feel once you're aware of these problems and are also then facing all of the challenges of trying to do something about them. So I would acknowledge if you hear these things and this is new to you and it's scary, like that's okay. You can feel that. That is a valid emotional, intellectual response to becoming aware of these issues. And if, like us, you've already been in these issues for a long time, it is also perfectly legitimate to have a morning where you wake up and you feel like there is no hope, we are doomed, there is no way that we're overcoming all of these problems to fix all of this, right? There's no way we're going to get this, countries will agree by 2030, and all these things. It's okay to feel that. um, you can't just be constantly hopeful. It takes work to have hope. It takes effort to have hope. It takes solidarity with other people that you can share this with who can help you to have hope. Um, so, if you were to ask me, Tim, do you have hope? I would say, well, I don't know that I necessarily have hope, but I refuse to give up. And that's partly because we don't know what is possible until it happens. And there are examples of things in history that seemed impossible, and yet they managed to happen. And change can sometimes happen very quickly and very unexpectedly. It might be a long, frustrating, decades of banging your head against the wall on something, but then the right moment for society could happen. The zeitgeist is there, and suddenly we cross a social tipping point where people wake up and they're like, oh, we really, really need to get serious and do something now about this. Each time we have these extreme events that happen, that's making more people wake up to the reality of this. Even here in the United States, I see a big change, from 10 years ago, that even people who would have been deniers or skeptics, they're saying, well, I have eyes. I can see that the weather has changed, that things are not the same. Why is that? And so we we would only be defeating ourselves if we give up, because it could be that we will get there, or at the very least our efforts won't have been for nothing, in the sense that we end up with 2.5 degrees instead of 4 degrees. And that could be the difference between, human civilization surviving or not. So every little bit is still contributing. And so make sure you have that support system, and don't put a pressure on yourself that you have to always be happy and optimistic and hopeful. It's a process. Support one another and just keep working toward what you know the truth to be, that we need these changes to happen in society for humanity, that we can actually ultimately get to a better place. We might have to go through a little bit of a darker time before we come out on the other end of that. But we've also seen that in human history, right? How many times, uh, you know, in China did they have a cycle of, several hundred years of a nice, peaceful, stable dynasty, and then things collapsed and they had a big civil war, and but then they made another dynasty. China is still there, right? They've seen a lot of ups and downs. They're still there. India has seen a lot of ups and downs. They're still there. Europe went through the whole Dark Ages after the Roman Empire collapsed, and yet they came out of it, and science came back, and we discovered that the Earth revolves around the sun, and rather than the other way around, and the Earth was round, not flat. So, just it's very easy if we limit ourselves to only thinking about right now to feel lost and overwhelmed. But in the grand scheme of things, humanity has come a long, long way. And we hopefully still have a long way to go. Um, Time will tell, history will tell, but we're part of writing that history right now. And I do keep myself motivated to work on it because we have to. And it does still ultimately get us to the change that we need. I hope. I will continue to at least believe that and do whatever I can toward it. And if all of us do that, we can. It is scientifically doable to meet these challenges. It's just getting over this political hurdle, um, which I think we can do, and that's why ACE exists, and we have the tools there to do it. So whether you're going to choose this as something you want to work on or you're going to advance it as best you can in your individual capacity, go for it and just figure out how to incorporate some climate into whatever you're doing, right? It's relevant to every discipline. Doesn't matter what you're studying. There is some way that you can take that thing you care about studying and want your job to be and make that into something that also helps contribute toward climate and environment, right? If you love being an engineer and you're being an engineer because that's what you want to do, there's a million ways that we need engineers to help us solve the climate crisis. If you want to go into business, there's still a million ways that you can come up with new business models and change our models to be better, figure out how to make money doing, the right things that we need to do. Um, you want to study more of the social sciences or the arts can contribute. They're very powerful for raising awareness and touching people on an emotional level, which gets past all of the, intellectual barriers and the ideological barriers of why people deny things. So, you know, every one of us has something we can do in some way that our natural gifts would contribute to that. So figure out how you can do that and have a support system, keep your motivation as best you can. Um, give yourself some slack when you're not feeling it, and together we're all going to do our best to get there. That's my closing remark.
Absolutely. Actually, think good things do take time, and hope is a very powerful thing to have. So even if we're feeling bad, I think it's okay. Maybe tomorrow will be better. You never know. We are only hoping for the best. So anyway, thank you so much, Tim, for joining us today. Um, to our audiences out there, if you have any questions, please comment it down below, and we will hopefully have them answered in the next episode. We have Tim on with us. I'm making that statement right now. And I'm inviting you as a guest in another episode again.
Uh-oh. Well, I guess I'll see you again, folks. So in that case, please give me interesting questions to respond to. And thanks again for having me for this first episode, welcoming you into the ACE family, raising awareness on these topics now, and wishing all the success for this new series.
Thank you so much. And audiences, you guys know what to do. Like, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel and all our social media accounts. Um, and stay safe out there. Have a good night. We'll see you again soon. Thank you so much. And Tim, it was wonderful having you. Hope we can do this again. We will do this again.
Take care, everyone.
So thank you so much, guys, once again, and we'll see you next time.